I hope you guys believe me when I tell you that I try my best to read as many comments or messages that you guys send me, whether it be here on YouTube or my personal Instagram, for bands, albums, or artists to check out that maybe I'll buy an album from or even do a video on. And I would say over the past handful of years I've been doing more of like these deep dive video essays, whatever you want to call them, styles of videos that are more into the region of like dark, twisted, crazy media, or just bands that I overall enjoy. Occasionally I'll get comments wondering if I'll ever do a video on this band called Kettle Cadaver. And whenever I get comments about these guys, typically people would describe it that it's super disturbing, some of the most messed up, extreme, vile, heinous things you'll ever see a band do on their live performances on video. And considering that, I would always keep Kettle Cadaver off in the back burner, that maybe one day I'll do a video on them. But the reason why they cut in the front line, hence why I'm doing a video about them now, is recently I got a message on my personal Instagram from one of my followers, his username being Gull Gazette, who told me again about Kettle Cadaver, thinking it would be perfect for my channel, and recommended I watch this documentary called Dead Hands Dig Deep. It's a very well-made and interesting documentary that you can watch in full on the Internet Archive's website. Just so you're aware, a majority of the information I'll be telling you about Kettle Cadaver comes from this, as really Dead Hands Dig Deep is basically the bulk of information you can find about Kettle Cadaver, as a lot of it's either scattered or lost throughout time, that if you want to know about them, again, this documentary is the best place to start out with. While Dead Hands Dig Deep talks about the band Kettle Cadaver, the main person of interest for it, of course, would be their vocalist, Edwin Borsheim. After watching the documentary and scavenge whatever else bit of information I can online about Edwin, I gotta admit, he is quite the enigma of a character in the most extreme way possible. Of course, what makes Edwin have this just extreme enigma and aura attached with him mainly comes from all of the live performances he did as the vocalist for Kettle Cadaver, that I know I'm just echoing what you guys told me. The performances and stage antics are just insane and over the top to a whole new level. From what I was able to tell online from video footage is that Kettle Cadaver performances are just basically forms of sadomasochism being unleashed in a concert environment. Most of these events, if not all of them, would be done by Edwin Borsheim, and this would range between Edwin getting into fistfights with people in the audience to basically self-mutilating on stage. And when I'm referring to self-mutilating on stage, which is already insane enough to begin with at face value, not only is it just, you know, the, I guess, bare basics of getting a knife or a razor blade and cutting yourself and you bleed a little bit on stage. No, Edwin takes it a step further and does forms of self-mutilating that is, how do I put this, on the same level as those Pain Olympic videos from the early 2000s that were popping up on the internet. That, man, I don't care of any form of it. To see an individual nail a block of wood through his genital region, it's not really something you're going to forget anytime soon. If you don't believe me, and you have morbid curiosity that you want to see for yourself, just know that a majority that I'm talking about you can find on their video release that was put out back in 2002 called A Taste of Blood, which it is uploaded here on YouTube, but obviously it's a censored version because the uncut version would get taken down immediately. And there are individuals out there on the internet that have uploaded it elsewhere that's uncensored. If you are so inclined to look for it, just all I can say is God have mercy on your soul if you watch it in full. Seeing all the extreme and explicit videos by Kettle Cadaver to all of the online conversations of how people describe them, one would immediately connect the dots and notice the similarities between Edwin Borsheim and GG Allin. In terms of stage antics and overall attitude, Edwin and GG share a lot of similar traits of having that mindset of let's make rock and roll dangerous again. It's just what I truly do wonder is when it comes to these artists that have this persona of this violent kind of like environment they're trying to create, why does GG Allin get so much more attention than anyone else compared to him? Personally, I think what separates the two in terms of recognition here is GG Allin was a trailblazer with this approach of like violent concert shows and making rock and roll dangerous again. That gave him more notoriety, that really he got a lot more infamy attached with it that he used to his advantage. He toured a lot more. I think it's a huge reason as to why he got arrested in all these different states as the story goes with him. And the biggest difference is, as well, GG Allin was documented a hell of a lot more than really anyone else. I mean, still to this day, there are people making videos and fan documentaries and blogs and stories all about him, still continuing the legacy that GG Allin left behind. Whereas when it comes to the story of Kettle Cadaver and Edwin Borsheim, I think a huge reason as to why they're not talked about as much is one, they weren't documented nearly as much as GG Allin, and that mainly has to do with the fact that when it came to their live shows and performances, they would stick to their home turf. So they would mainly tour on the west coast of like California, that being their home state. Oregon and Washington was really the only other states that they would venture out to. Thus, when it comes to the legacy of Kettle Cadaver, it's mainly rooted within their home state. Though there are similarities between the two that's undeniable, I do feel like Kettle Cadaver is a hell of a lot more than just a GG Allin worship knockoff band, as when it comes to their influences, their overall persona, image, and what they did musically, there's a lot more layers to it. Obviously, in order to understand all of the layers of Kettle Cadaver, we need to understand Edwin Borsheim. It's mainly known that Edwin resided in Temecula, California, but his place of birth would be Klepp, Norway. Edwin would be the son of Pierre Louis Borsheim, a Norwegian guitarist who was in a blues rock band called Nerk Twins. There isn't much information about Pierre other than he was a widely respected guitarist in the Norwegian music scene, and that sadly he passed away in the year of 1985. It doesn't say the exact specifics, but he was only 38 years old, meaning that Edwin was out a father only at the age of 8, sadly. Their relationship has never been talked about, and you can't find any information online about it, so again, I'm just going to assume they keep it private, which total respects to that. Other than, I'm just going to assume that Edwin, growing up at such a young age, he was already surrounded with the, artistry of music to begin with, if his father was a widely respected musician. Shortly after the passing of his father, Edwin and his mother would then move to California. From what it showcases in the Dead Hands Dig Deep documentary is that his life growing up was quite difficult for him, considering he's this outsider of the bunch in the surrounding community, really only finding comfort, whether it be with social interactions with his stepbrother or certain movies, music, and wrestling. As he matured into a young adult, he used the inheritance money that he got from his father who passed away to buy up a half-acre of land where he would reside and host wrestling matches. And when I'm talking wrestling matches, I'm not saying in the style of like WWE or WCW where it's like all professional and everything safe. I'm talking backyard wrestling where it's bare knuckles, anything really goes, weaponry, barbed wire, ultra violence is like the norm. And I really do feel like this is one of the key components that really started to the fascination for Edwin of making things not only just ultra violent, but also using a lot of forms of realism in the most extreme way possible as well. As Edwin Borsheim himself describes it in the documentary, is that when it came to these backyard wrestling types of matches, he would just allow anything to happen. If people wanted to go on his land just to beat the crap out of each other in this wooden makeshift ring, he would allow it. If people wanted to bring their own weapons, he would allow it. If people wanted to fight Edwin himself, he would do it on the spot. He had this attitude of just no holds barred was just the norm when it came to these backyard wrestling events. As for the half-acre land that he purchased, it really didn't look like there was anything on it. It just looked like nothing, dirt, sand, and like one or two like DIY looking cabins, and that's really it. And it really played into his other fascination, as he stated that one of his big inspirations and one of his favorite movies was Mad Max. And I do kind of feel like, in a way, whether he meant it or not, buying that land, it looked like it resembled the setting of a Mad Max movie. When it came to his musical interest, it's quite apparent that stuff like hard rock, hardcore punk, death rock, crossover, and metal were his main interests in terms of its music, its dark and heavy-like sound. But whenever Edwin discussed it in the documentary, he would seem to have a lot more fascination with the band's image and persona, almost in a sense as if a band has to be true to what they are singing about or they're fake. An example of it would be when he discussed Slayer. Slayer has a song called War Ensemble. It's a band that he enjoys in terms of its sound, and they have lyrical themes with something he's interested in, but Slayer themselves, the band members, never experienced war firsthand. So what do they know about making music all about these themes? Thus, to Edwin, it's just fake and nothing he had interest with anymore after learning that. It seems to me, from what I've gathered with just Edwin's portrayal of all of this, is to him, if he has interest or inspiration from something, he will go 110% with it. It's either all in or nothing. Thus, he really seemed to have this fascination with like forms of like realism and the most extreme, brutalist ways possible when portraying it. Which, of course, having that mindset would carry over to the music making of Kettle Cadaver. The band wouldn't be that prolific, only having a handful of releases in their discography, but there are some worth checking out, one of which being their sole full-length album, Halloween. I ended up listening to this album quite a handful of times before making this video, and I gotta say, I'm quite surprised at how much I enjoyed it and the direction they're kind of going with this album, as it feels like a melting pot of all different forms of like dark music, as obviously hardcore punk and crossover thrash metal are noticeable with some of the heavier portions on it, but then there's other portions that it gets a bit black metal influenced or goth rock and death rock influenced, that it feels like, again, a combination of all different forms of dark music playing off of each other's strengths. Take, for example, my personal favorite song on the album, Coffin Bangers, which has the sounds and melodies of goth rock and death rock meets with the aggression of hardcore punk. Or the song on here, 12 a.m., which has more of like these melodic metal riffs play through, and Edwin's vocals almost resemble somewhat of like this rougher, nastier version of like black metal grunts come through. Overall, I would say just check out this album if you want somewhat of a mashup of just dark, aggressive music all combined together. It's worth noting with Kettle Cadaver that even though when they are talked about, it mainly has to do with all the wild antics, which I'll be discussing a little bit more later on in this video, but let it be known that their musicianship is honestly something that I feel like fans of either hardcore punk and metal can find appreciation with. It has that super gritty, dark DIY approach that honestly not everything they did was just shock value, as there are some shows you can find on YouTube where they performed and that's it. There was no fists being thrown at the audience, no like wild mutilation happening, just a very solid, fun-looking show. As I believe they did a show back in 1999 in Hollywood, and it's an honestly really solid set. They even did a cover of Celtic Frost's Circle of the Tyrant in this performance, which is really sick. The only other releases that they would do would come from video albums, one of which being the Taste of Blood, the video album I talked about earlier on in this video, that is just 18 minutes of pure hell to look at. But it really is attached to what Kettle Cadaver is mainly known for, those wild antics, the self-mutilation, the fist fights with audience members, just the pure chaos that makes Kettle Cadaver what it is. You will find it on this video album. And the other one that they released a few years later in 2008, I believe, would be Among the Damned, which I gotta admit, this video album, although it has some extreme portions visually, obviously, with it, is way more badass because they would actually do music videos for certain songs within the spirit of Mad Max with some of their shoots. That the overall music and just, again, quality in the DIY presentation of it, it's honestly really kick-ass, and you can watch the whole thing here on YouTube, and I would highly recommend so because I think this has the best material as it includes new songs other than the material recycled from Halloween. And just the visuals and production value is like really charming, again, for that DIY approach. The only other bit of info that I can provide to you about the music of Kettle Cadaver is that they were actually a part of another documentary called Road Dogs, released in 2011. It's a 90-minute documentary that for the most part is done very well, that keeps up with 3 bands. The 3 bands in question, of course, would be Kettle Cadaver, Peppermint Creeps, and Heavenly Trip to Hell. Of its 90-minute runtime, I would say roughly 60 to 70% of it is primarily focused on Peppermint Creeps, as it was released in 2011 and their mastermind and drummer Tracy Michaels passed away in 2008. So this documentary comes off more like a dedication to that band, thus why most of it is focused on Peppermint Creeps. But the footage they have of Kettle Cadaver is still worth checking out, as it has raw footage of some of their concerts they performed at dive bars, and of course chaos ensues. People get the crap beat out of them. I think one guy even gets knocked out by Edwin, and it's basically everything you would kind of expect if you watched Dead Hands Dig Deep prior to it. So it's not something I would say you have to see if you want to get into Kettle Cadaver or understand them, but it's like if you just want bonus footage of some of their live performances, to even snippets of, you know, interviews that are kind of cut short at times, which is kind of a bummer with it, it's still worth checking out regardless. Although, if I have to cherry pick here with the Road Dogs documentary, it does provide footage of one of the concert attendees at a Kettle Cadaver show describing that Edwin sodomized a corpse of a dead animal, which, yeah, that's kind of easy to believe when you kind of dive into like the madness that is Kettle Cadaver. As for Edwin's personal life, I do feel like his environment that he resided in and the people he affiliated himself with really affected him emotionally and mentally to the point that it led to his downfall. Because in one instance, Edwin would reach a high point marrying Eva O on August 8th, 2008. She's one of the founding members to that of Christian Death, and it's always described as they were inseparable, they were like meant for each other. And it would seem as if this would be the best it would get for Edwin. It would only be 2 years later that Eva and Edwin would end up separating, where at this point now I really do feel like it put Edwin in a very deep emotional turmoil. You can notice that when you watch the documentary Dead Hands Dig Deep, because it honestly gets disturbing in the emotional aspect of when he discusses the separation of his marriage, because there's even a point within his own home, or it's like his shed or whatever, where he has like a wooden doll that is Eva that he sleeps with in a coffin, which again, mentally disturbing to think about that, and really has this problem with like separation, or like he still wants to be with Eva but always has to fight the urge to contact her back or get back in touch with her, having this consistent battle of letting go of something. So that marriage that ended up only lasting 2 years clearly destroyed him emotionally. Then there's portions within that documentary that shows Edwin having mental breakdowns that he recorded himself with, that he showcased within the documentary for the sake of it. And again, it's really creepy and disturbing to watch, seeing this man like literally break down like second by second emotionally from these like mental breakdowns. So clearly, again, emotional turmoil was at an all-time high for him after the divorce. And that's the thing with that documentary. Each different day that they clearly interviewed Edwin Borsheim, it honestly looked like his demeanor, his tone, his facial expressions, and what he talked about were slightly different, almost like as if he had clear case of schizophrenia that was like never treated or examined, because I swear to God, it seemed like they interviewed 4 different people. It also didn't help that he had a clear case of alcohol and drug addiction. He has hostility towards his mother. He was living off grid. I believe at some point at the beginning of the documentary, it stated that they had quite the difficult time getting in touch with Edwin as he had no cell phone. So again, just another form of isolation for him. And that half-acre body of land that he owned, he stated that he had no visitors for over a year. So this extreme form of isolation was something he was dealing with. What you're really seeing with the documentary Dead Hands Dig Deep is somebody at their wits' end. I know it's stated by Edwin that in post-production after this film was released in 2016, he called it that this documentary was therapeutic for him, which I really think that comes off more because he finally got some human interaction for the first time in a long time. And that would be to no avail, sadly, as a year later in 2017, Edwin would end up taking his own life. Now, the last thing I want to do is end this video on a low note here and then just have my send-off and that's it. So to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to end this on a more positive note if I even can. Is that when it comes to the story of Kettle Cadaver and Edwin Borsheim, is that, yeah, at face value, it's very explicit, it's very violent, it has a lot of sadomasochistic just forms of ways of expression, basically, when you look at it at face value, from the live footage that is shown online to the video albums that they did. It's impossible to ignore that, and I get it. And what was the purpose of it? No one really knows, I think, because mainly, again, of just how, not really well documented Kettle Cadaver was. There's still a lot of things left up in the air in terms of information, like why did Eva and Edwin separate? That's still quite the mystery that's never been explained. Or like what exactly Edwin did in terms of like his problems with the law enforcement, as he was called on from the police quite a handful of times. There's still like a lot kind of unexplained here. But from what I gather, Edwin was someone who just got the crap beat out of him in life. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, any which way possible, this man got the crap beat out of him. And yet, he never really gave up in some sense. I mean, sure, it ended up to his downfall and demise, but what he did have, what he was able to do, he was able to be unapologetically himself. From all the influences and inspiration and interest that he would, again, just go full force with it 110%. He wanted basically realism in the most extreme, brutal, and unapologetic ways possible. You can just tell that whenever he had an inspiration. And I think it's because of that, what he was able to do with all of this extreme, explicit forms of art was unapologetically being himself and not holding back any punches. And for that, he has my respect. So I would say for people who are looking for music that's extreme, not just in terms musically, but the persona, the image, what it represented, and just the insane stories that you can look into for a source of entertainment and enjoyment, yeah, Kettle Cadaver's got quite the back catalog of stories to tell that God knows what other stories have yet to be spoken about with this group. And it's still cool to see that in some aspects it's still remembered, as I believe there's a fan-made Instagram page that is trying its best to showcase any forms of like dedication or memorabilia to Kettle Cadaver. So that's pretty cool, of like that kind of legacy. And yeah, again, it's just really explicit, insane stuff that really pushes boundaries in that violent way, but still, Kettle Cadaver is unlike really anything I've really come across in terms of stories to cover here on my YouTube channel. So I thank you all again for the individuals who have recommended me it. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, links provided to everything I talked about will be in the description below. And like always, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. Till then, have a great day.